I am joined by Alice Living. You may know her online. Previously, as Clean Eating Alice, she had over 500,000 followers on Instagram in 2017. She had celebrity PT clients, appeared on the cover of magazines, and even achieved her third Sunday Times bestseller. She was celebrated as the embodiment of health, but that was the furthest thing from the truth. Alice, your book, Give Me Strength, is kind of setting the record straight. It's part memoir, part guide, and it's a very new version of you.
It is.
Welcome, by the way.
Oh, thanks so much for having
me. I like
me.
that we're in matching
Yeah, we
serious
decided to
black
match today.
blazers. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, it's part memoir, part self-help. And, you know, writing a memoir age 31 is a bit weird, but so much happened
A
in
life
10
lived, in
Yeah.
fairness.
So much happened in 10 years. And, you know, I was part of that first cohort of quote unquote influencers online, although that didn't even exist when I first started. And, you know, it was a really interesting time. And yeah, like I said, so much happened. And I think there was so much that I felt looking back, I really wanted to reflect on because I've had so many learnings, thankfully. And so, yeah, it was time to put pen to paper. And I'm really happy that the book has been so well received and that it's helped so many people as a result.
The tagline is how I turned my back on restriction, nurtured the body I love, and how you can too. So it feels very empowered and very empowering because I think, you know, and trigger warning for anyone who is dealing or suffering with an eating disorder at the moment, you touch on your experience with disordered eating, would you say, or an eating disorder? Because I think there's a distinction between the two of those, although, you know, so many people may be undiagnosed but will absolutely identify as you know, struggling with disordered eating for sure.
Yeah, I think you're really right. And it is important to identify that. So there's a bit of a spectrum when it comes to eating disorders. And obviously an eating disorder typically is something that is diagnosed by a medical professional. That being said, that doesn't mean that anyone that struggled with their eating hasn't had an eating disorder if they haven't been diagnosed. What I would say is I kind of was more on the end of the spectrum that was a very disordered relationship with eating that we also know to be known as something called orthorexia.
Orthorexia, yeah.
And that is where you are very obsessive about the foods that you eat. So it's not that you're not eating or abstaining from eating, it's that what you are eating, you are meticulous about. So whether it's, you know, cutting out whole food groups, for example, so that you're not including, and often a common one is things like carbohydrates, for example, where you're like, oh, I can't have that. Or going out to a restaurant, but only ordering a very specific meal that doesn't include certain things. So, you know, I might have gone out and said, oh, can I have this, but not this, not that, not this. And it's also paired with that when you do consume those foods, or when you are in situations where those foods might be around, that they cause you to feel a sense of kind of anxiety or worry that in eating it, something might happen. So I think, yeah, that's how I'd kind of describe it.
And I guess that kind of term, clean eating, is a very positive term. On the one hand, you know, the opposite of clean eating is dirty eating. So we kind of, the idea being that you're either eating junk food or you're doing it right. And for you, that kind of, you know, I know that you have felt that there was a kind of sense that your profile was almost perpetuating that kind of push towards everything being, I mean, essentially restricted, but a fixation on good food versus bad food, which in and of itself is quite unhealthy.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I now don't associate with clean eating at all. I don't find it a helpful term. And the reason why is exactly as you've said, is that if we start to label foods as like good and bad, this is good, that's bad, can't have this, but can have that, it creates a very restrictive mindset around food. Now, I'm not saying that there are certain foods that are more nutrient dense that you want to be including in your diet more. You know, we all know vegetables are good for us, right? Yeah. However, when we start to say that like certain foods are bad, we can't have them, or like I mustn't eat this, or we feel guilt when we have them, it creates a problematic relationship with food. And I can't tell you how many women in particular, although obviously men can suffer from this too, I've spoken to, particularly since the book has come out as well, who've had a kind of realization that they have had a very problematic relationship with food. And as I detail in the book, this stuff starts young. Yeah. I mean, how many women have you spoken to who their mum might have said something to them when they were, I don't know, a teenager, young teenager even, and that's really stuck with them, or their first boyfriend might have made a comment about their body, and for whatever reason that's caused them to feel, shame for the rest of, their life sometimes.
And dictates how they behave with food and I also think it's funny because I look at my daughters who, eat with absolute abandon. You posted on Instagram the other day of you having a bowl of pasta, which I think for a lot of people and for a lot of women would be like, ooh, that's the epitome of bad. And you think of Sophia Loren, like beautifully, enjoying food. And yet so many women, and I think we learn quite early on that it's a lovely thing for a young lad to have a ferocious appetite, but Jesus, she's well able to put it away. It's kind of this idea that women should be tidier and smaller in every respect, and eating is at the core of that.
And I think that is what's at the heart of the problem, and the reason why I wrote the book and didn't just focus on myself, but instead looked at the wider issue of why women are, continually suffering with these things. This is multi-generational. I spoke to my mum and my grandma, and these things are passed down. And if we don't stop and realize the damage that it's doing to particularly young girls and that next generation, then these things are going to continue to be passed down. So I think that, it's not one person's problem, it's not one person's fault. It's a wide issue that is, social media, the way that women have been portrayed and dictated to and kept small, you're right, over so many years, that can cause us to then have these issues with food.
Yeah. And you mention in your own observation of your mum's relationship with not just food but exercise as well. So it was this kind of that informed quite a bit for you.
Yeah, I obviously with her full permission was able to kind of dig into a little bit of my own, I guess, relationship with food and where some of the stuff that I learned came from. Because, where do we learn that carbs are bad or that we have to exercise to lose weight and that's the only reason why we do that? And a lot of it does start at home. Yeah. So, I spent a lot of time kind of looking back on the things that my mum had done, and she had her own problematic relationship with food. So it was almost like, history repeating itself when I then came into having those issues. But I think, in talking about this stuff, it does make it a lot easier for us to have compassion and understanding for where that person is and was. And I feel my mum now is in a much better place, thankfully. And we've now had some amazing conversations about it. And, even now I find myself, occasionally triggered, or she does. And we're able to have those kind of open communications about why that might be or why we felt the way we do. And I think it's been a really positive thing for the both of us. And she's amazing.
Because I think that's the thing, isn't it, with food is such a social thing. Our lives are built around it. Occasions, like the happiest of times, centre around consumption of food. And so actually the person who's restricting or has difficulty with their own relationship with food, it spills into the family. And I think the family can really be at odds as to what to do or how to approach or how to guide the person that they see struggling. Have you got any advice? And I know it's, every situation and every person is different.
And I think, if someone is struggling with their relationship with food, or someone that they know is, it's really hard because oftentimes, you have to deal with these situations very delicately because there's a lot of emotion involved, and, it can be very complex as well. First things first, I'd say always try and see a professional if you can, if you really think that you or someone that you know is struggling. But I also think that there are things that we can do just generally that help foster a positive relationship with food, right? And so it's things like, you mentioned about your girls, and I love that. And I think it's when you're sitting down to food, even the language that we use when we're talking about it, not using different rules, I guess, for boys and girls, for example. Oh, you can have a bigger portion, you need to have a smaller one. How we talk about hunger and fullness, oh, you shouldn't be hungry, you've just eaten. Like, kids are pretty good at having an intuitive hunger level. Okay. So if they're saying they're hungry, oftentimes they are.
We start to override those natural instincts,
And I also just think that understanding that, even if you don't mean to, some of the stuff that we can say and do around food, around exercise, around our bodies, I think how we feel about our bodies is a big one. So I remember, my mum feeling really negatively about her body, and a lot of that kind of narrative was then obviously passed down to me, how we feel about ourselves, how we look at ourselves. So I see a lot now, I guess, because I'm in like the echo chamber on Instagram of like positive stuff, but I see so much about how mums are now talking to their daughters about, body image and feeling confident and feeling happy in themselves. And I do feel that we've come on so far, but these moments really matter. And so it's the language that we use, the things that we say, and the conversations that we're having, just trying to be conscious of the fact that they can have an impact. And so trying to really just make those small changes to be more positive and to be more encouraging about just people feeling better about themselves.
And it's interesting because I guess there's that kind of sense of, oh, you would never say that to a child, but it's equally important how you speak to yourself in front of them, because they're internalizing that, right? So if you're putting on something on, oh, I feel over, I feel fat, or being completely very critical of yourself, you may be absolutely, generous and compassionate with them, but if they see you criticizing yourself, they kind of take that on, right? So it's how you speak to yourself as much as how you speak to them.
Absolutely. And I actually wrote this morning on my Instagram, but I think it's really important that we understand that we cannot shame ourselves into feeling better about our body, about our relationship with exercise or with food. I think a lot of people feel that if they, stand in the mirror and tell themselves they look awful, that somehow that's going to encourage them into feeling better. And it's just really unhealthy, and shame resides in so many of these issues. And I really, in my conversations with women constantly online or in real life, it is really the shame that keeps people in that really dark place. And if you can kind of cut yourself off from thinking that you need to feel awful about yourself, or that, that constant voice, like you said, of telling yourself that you're not enough, you're not good enough, the more we realize that the world is full of different bodies, different people, different, shapes and sizes, and that everyone is able to be accepted and loved. And I kind of feel that that's really, really important to understand.
We were chatting off air about that ideal, okay? And I don't want to be bringing you back because this is, the new version, but that time where clean eating was so prevalent, I guess, it had kind of replaced the naughties, super skinny. It felt like a better version, certainly. It was less about skinny and more about strong, but not unproblematic at the same time.
No, and I think, as we were just chatting about, the thing that I really recognised was, and this is all with hindsight, by the way, because at the time I definitely didn't, but, with hindsight, you're able to see that each body ideal that we hero at a certain time, whether it's, Kim Kardashian's physique right now, or whether it's, strong, not skinny, or super skinny in the noughties, each of these is an unrealistic body ideal that we're saying this is the best figure, which is highly unattainable for most people, and therefore creates this feeling that we're not quite good enough unless we're in that shape or in that physique. And I think that it can be dressed up in lots of different ways. And yes, at the time, the reason why I think my messaging stuck was, you're right, it was seen to be healthy. I had rippling muscles, I had a six-pack, I was eating loads of broccoli.
But, delicious.
But the reality is that it was just, what we've seen time and time again, just dressed up in a different camouflage.
Yeah. So you must feel free.
I do. And I think freedom is a really good word, because I think that that's what I want for people. I feel that I put peace on the front of my cover and in the subtitle. And I think freedom and peace and calmness within your body is what I want for all women. I want, that there's not this constant narrative where you wake up and the first thought is, let me step on a scale and shame myself into feeling bad about my body, or let me go and look in the mirror and the first thing I think is, oh God, I look awful, and then try and get on with the rest of your day.
Berating yourself constantly.
I will not sit here and say that there's not a day that goes by now where I don't suddenly have, a little bit of a wobble or a moment where I might go, but I'm able so much more now to bring myself back from that place and know that where I'm at right now is so healthy and so sustainable for the rest of my life. And, we were talking about kids and things like that. And I think if that's in my future, I know that none of what I went through do I want to pass on to my children.
Yeah.
I want them to have a really healthy relationship with themselves, their body, exercise, all of these things matter. I've been a personal trainer for 10 years, so I know that there are things that we need to try and do to be quote unquote healthy, but those things are very different to what I previously thought was health.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I had an eating disorder for many years, and I had kind of dipped in and out with getting help with it, but never fully committed until I had my first daughter. And I remember this just stark moment of realizing that my ideas about myself, she was going to inherit, whether she wanted them or not, and she was going to have to figure them a way out of them later on. And so that became very much my motivation for for healing and for getting help, but you don't have to wait, I guess, is the truth, that long.
I think so. I think there's never a better time to start, improving your relationship with your body. Yeah. And it's never too late as well. I speak to women who follow me who are in their 60s, 70s, who are still on that journey. Yeah. And I think it's important to know that it's a lifelong one. I think we as women experience many changes across our lifetime, whether that be having children or going through certain hormonal fluctuations throughout our life. That can mean that we feel very differently about our body at different stages. Yeah. But I think that ultimately, if you can bring yourself back to practicing the same things, even, despite the changes that you might be going through, they can really help to sustain you through that lifelong journey.
Which brings us neatly to the pillars of fitness in your book, because as you say, personal trainer, we all know that we're supposed to move, but it's maybe less about that kind of punishing movement where you're associating calories out and exercise and this kind of hard approach, grueling, I would say, approach. Talk us through the 4 pillars.
Yeah, I think the reason why I did this second half of the book was the first half, obviously, it's very sort of reflective, and I didn't just want to end and be like, and that's me. So I was like, what can I do that's going to give people some practical tips of how they can go on the same journey that I have done. So really, they're about practical tips that people can implement into their lives that will make a difference to how they feel. I have been in the fitness industry for, like I said, 10 years. So they're things that I've learned along the way or when working with people. And I think you're right, part of that second phase of the book is really about getting people to kind of relearn their relationship with exercise predominantly, because I think so many of us have grown up. I mean, I use the example in there about like PE lessons at school. I mean, how many people hated them, right? And then you leave school and you're like, never again.
And also because I guess at that time, and you talk about the different stages of a woman, adolescence, we're suddenly getting to grips with changing bodies that we've no control over. And so we associate PE and the kind of vulnerability of showing our bodies in that way with exercise, and it's a negative thing, or can be.
Oh, definitely. And like even just the outfits, I mean,
the outfits are shocking. Also, it's like not being picked. There's the vulnerability of standing in a line and being like, that's not your thing. And so you probably do as a defensive mechanism go, do you know what, exercise is not my thing, I'm an artist.
And honestly, I think it happens to so many people. They leave school and they're like, sport wasn't for me. I was never one of the sporty kids, so I'm just not going to do it.
And now nobody's making me do it anymore, so I'm not.
So what I really wanted to try and do was work on people's relationship with exercise. The things that we know are fundamental for long-term health is just consistency with moving your body, but that can look really different for really different, people. So whether that be that you're going to hike 3 times a week, or you might go swimming, you might do yoga, you might try, I don't know, Pilates, whatever it might be. There are different things that work for different people, and at the heart of it is just consistently moving your body over time. And then secondly to that, it's about, where is that motivation to move coming from? Is it because you're shaming yourself into doing it, or is it because you actually have found a way of moving that you enjoy? And really that's what's crucial, is with long-term relationships with exercise, what we see time and time again is that there's that fundamental factor of enjoyment in there. So don't force yourself to do something that you don't love. If running isn't your thing, please don't make yourself go on a run every weekend and hate every minute of it. Find something that works for you. Try different things. Make it social. Tennis, I don't know, whatever you like, but really try and make sure that there is a key factor of enjoyment at the heart of it, so that you have that positive connection to moving your body, and then you can sustain that.
Oh, I've got to exercise again. That kind of thing. Okay. Speaking of tennis, you met Andy Murray recently. How was that?
Oh, I love him so. I mean, he's a hero. It was great. I went to an event and he was hosting a tennis lesson. Now, I have to admit that was definitely not one of my sporting moments that I was proud of.
You looked the part, girl. That's half the battle.
I managed to hit about 1 or 2 balls.
That'll do.
And, walked away.
Return his serve.
Yeah, well.
She's on. Did you?
I would say that when they were like, do you want to do a serve for him? I said, can I do underhand, please? I just can't even bring myself to have the shame of being able to throw it up. But you know what? He was great. And actually what I loved about him, he was so encouraging to everyone, even, the tennis novices like myself. He gave really good feedback and I left thinking, maybe I will give this a go.
Well, look, that's what you're doing for an abundance of women and men alike with this book, and with your generosity in sharing your story and your experience and all of the personal details that you have done. Give Me Strength is out now. Alice Living, thank you so much.